London, June 1817. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Persian carpets of White's Club, that bastion of gentlemanly exclusivity where fortunes changed hands on the turn of a card and reputations were built or destroyed over glasses of port. In the reading room, where leather chairs held men whose collective wealth could purchase half of England, a conversation was taking place that would alter the course of two lives in ways none present could possibly imagine. Lord Peter Denby, whose 25 years had gifted him confidence far exceeding his wisdom, leaned back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed himself terribly clever. His voice carried across the room with deliberate volume, ensuring his words reached not just his intended audience, but every gentleman within earshot. "Your reputation precedes you, Silverton," he drawled, swirling brandy in his glass. "The architect, they call you. The man who can arrange marriages for the most hopeless cases. But I confess, I find the accolades rather excessive." Marcus Beaumont, Duke of Silverton, looked up from the Times with glacial politeness. At 34, he possessed the kind of face that revealed little and promised less, all sharp angles and controlled expression. 5 years of widowhood had honed his features into something approaching marble, beautiful but cold. "Do you indeed?" Marcus replied, his tone suggesting profound disinterest in young Denby's opinions. "Any fool can match pretty heiresses with desperate second sons," Denby continued, warming to his theme. "The true test of your supposed genius would be something genuinely impossible." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. 8 gentlemen lowered their newspapers, sensing the approach of something noteworthy. Lord Denby had the look of a man about to propose something spectacular. "I assume you have a particular impossibility in mind," Marcus said, setting aside his newspaper with movements of deliberate precision. Denby's smile widened. "Miss Beatrice Langford, 7 complete seasons, 29 years old, not a single proposal in all that time, the eternal wallflower, the confirmed bluestocking. I wager £10,000 that even you, with all your celebrated skill, could not marry her off to an earl or superior rank within 8 weeks. The sum drew a sharp intake of breath from the room. £10,000 was a ruinous amount, a fortune that could purchase a country estate or sink a family line. It was reckless, absurd, and utterly irresistible. Marcus studied the younger man with the analytical gaze that had earned him his nickname. Lord Denby was testing him, that much was obvious. The boy sought to make his own reputation by challenging someone else's. It was a game Marcus understood intimately, though he rarely indulged in it anymore. Not since Catherine had died, taking with her his capacity for frivolous amusement. But his pride, that treacherous thing, stirred to life. "You have £10,000 to lose, Denby? I have sufficient confidence in the impossibility of the task. Do you accept, Your Grace? Or shall we all understand that your reputation is perhaps built on foundations of sand?" 7 pairs of eyes watched Marcus. In the brutal arithmetic of the ton, backing down from such a public challenge would damage his standing more than losing it outright. And some small part of him, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be alive, was curious about Miss Beatrice Langford and her 7 seasons of failure. "I accept your wager," Marcus said, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. 8 weeks from today, Miss Langford engaged or wed to a gentleman holding the rank of Earl or above. £10,000. Denby extended his hand, and they shook. Lord Ashworth immediately called for the betting book, that infamous ledger where White's recorded its members' most outrageous wagers. Within minutes, the terms were inscribed in permanent ink, witnessed by 8 signatures, dated the 14th of June, 1817. If stories of wit, vengeance, and love that transforms the most guarded hearts move you, I would be grateful for a like and subscribe. Join us for this tale of a wager that became something far more dangerous than either party could have anticipated. By the following morning, every drawing room in Mayfair knew of the bet. The Ton possessed a remarkable efficiency when it came to disseminating scandal, and the wager concerning poor Miss Langford spread through London society like flame through dry kindling. Marcus listened to the whispers at his club, noted the sideways glances at a morning assembly, and felt the first stirrings of something uncomfortable that might have been shame had he permitted himself to feel such things. He had made a wager on a woman's marriage prospects as if she were a horse at Newmarket. Catherine would have been appalled, but the bet was made, witnessed, and recorded. The only path now was forward. He began his investigation that very afternoon, employing methods both direct and subtle. His secretary made inquiries. His aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Silverton, consulted her extensive network of gossiping matrons. Within 48 hours, Marcus possessed a comprehensive portrait of Miss Beatrice Langford, and it was nothing like what he had expected. The bare facts were these: daughter of the late Sir William Langford, Baronet, who had died 7 years previous, leaving his only child an income of £200 per year. Not poverty, but hardly riches. No mother, no siblings, no family of influence. She resided with her widowed aunt, Mrs. Helena Fairweather, in a respectable but modest establishment in Bloomsbury. 7 seasons, 29 years old, never betrothed, never even courted with any seriousness. But the interesting details lay beneath the surface. Miss Langford was described as unfashionably tall, unfashionably thin, and unfashionably opinionated. She read philosophy, she studied mathematics. She had been overheard at more than one assembly discussing topics no gently bred lady should even comprehend, much less speak of in public. And then Marcus discovered the most intriguing detail of all. "Your Grace," his secretary said, entering the study with an expression of poorly concealed surprise. "I have confirmed that Miss Langford is indeed the author of those economic treatises published under the name Bartholomew Lawrence." Marcus looked up sharply. The essays on monetary theory? The ones Lord Whitfield quoted in his speech to Parliament last month? "The very same, Your Grace. She has been publishing under the pseudonym for 3 years. The editor of the journal believes Mr. Lawrence to be a Cambridge scholar. He has no idea the author is an unmarried woman operating from her aunt's drawing room." For the first time in 5 years, Marcus felt genuine curiosity stir to life. This was no ordinary wallflower. This was a woman of formidable intellect, concealing her light behind a masculine nom de plume because society would never take seriously the economic theories of a spinster. He read her essays that evening, all 12 of them, tracking her arguments with growing respect. Her analysis of trade restrictions was brilliant. Her proposals for banking reform were actually quite radical. The woman thought with precision and clarity that half the lords would envy, and London's drawing rooms dismissed her as an unmarriable bluestocking. The injustice of it rankled, which surprised him. Marcus had thought himself long past caring about society's casual cruelties. He orchestrated their first meeting with the care of a military campaign. Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly, late afternoon on a Thursday. He knew from his research that Miss Langford visited the shop every Thursday without fail, often spending 2 hours among the shelves. Marcus positioned himself in the philosophy section, apparently absorbed in a volume of Adam Smith, and waited. She arrived at 3:30, moving through the shop with the focused purpose of someone on a mission. Marcus observed her from behind his book, cataloging details. Tall, yes, easily 5 feet and 8 inches. Possessing neither the fashion nor the affectation to draw the eye in a crowded ballroom, she wore a gown of gray muslin that had seen several seasons of wear, brown hair pulled back in a simple style, spectacles perched on her nose as she examined book spines. But when she selected a volume and opened it, her face transformed. Absolute concentration, lips moving slightly as she read, one hand rising unconsciously to tuck a stray hair behind her ear. Intelligence radiated from her like heat from a fire. Marcus moved closer, angling his position so their paths would intersect naturally. "Remarkable work, is it not?" he said, as she reached for a book on the same shelf he was perusing. She startled slightly, looking up at him with gray eyes magnified by her spectacles. "I beg your pardon." "The Wealth of Nations," Marcus indicated the Smith volume he held. "Though I confess, I find his theories on division of labor less compelling than his moral philosophy." Miss Langford's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing him. Most gentlemen claim to admire Smith without having actually read him. "You are familiar with the theory of moral sentiments?" "I am. His concept of the impartial spectator as moral compass is quite elegant, though one might argue he underestimates the role of education and circumstance in shaping moral judgment." Marcus lowered his voice slightly, stepping a fraction closer, allowing the intellectual challenge to carry a subtle undercurrent of intimacy. Something shifted in her expression. Surprise, perhaps. Or was it pleasure at finding someone willing to engage with ideas rather than weather patterns? She held his gaze, a flicker of interest lighting her gray eyes. "That is precisely the criticism Godwin raises," she said slowly. "Though I would argue Smith's framework allows for educational influence while maintaining the fundamental capacity for moral reasoning." "Miss Langford," Marcus said, as if the recognition had just struck him, "forgive me. I did not immediately recognize you without the crowds of Almack's." Pink colored her cheeks. "You have the advantage of me, sir. Marcus Beaumont, Duke of Silverton. I believe we have been introduced, though I confess the circumstances escape me." They had been introduced 3 years ago at a musicale. She had been presented to him for exactly 30 seconds before some fashionable lady had claimed his attention. He remembered because he had noted, with the detachment of someone still deep in grief, that Miss Langford had the look of someone expecting to be dismissed. "Your Grace," she said now, offering a small curtsy. "I am surprised you recall me at all. On the contrary, I have heard excellent reports of your understanding of economic theory. I wonder if you might be interested in attending a small gathering at Silverton House next Wednesday evening. My aunt hosts occasional salons for those interested in intellectual discourse. We are expecting Professor Richmond from Cambridge to discuss his latest work on trade theory." Miss Langford stared at him as if he had just suggested they fly to the moon. "I assure you it is quite respectable," Marcus continued smoothly. "My aunt, the Dowager Duchess, serves as hostess. Perhaps a dozen guests, mixed company, very informal." "I am aware of your Grace's salons," Miss Langford said carefully. "But I cannot imagine why you would extend such an invitation to me." "Because I suspect you would contribute more of value to the conversation than most of London's self-proclaimed intellectuals. Will you come?" She studied him for a long moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly analyzed. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I should be honored to attend, Your Grace." "Excellent. My aunt will send formal invitation to your residence. Thursday next, 8 o'clock." He departed shortly after, leaving Miss Langford standing among the bookshelves with an expression of profound confusion. Phase 1 complete. The salon at Silverton House was everything Marcus had promised and nothing Beatrice had dared to hope for. The drawing room, with its cream silk walls and ceiling painted with classical scenes, held perhaps 15 people, all engaged in animated conversation. Professor Richmond held court near the fireplace, gesturing enthusiastically as he explained his theories on comparative advantage. 2 ladies Beatrice recognized as noted bluestockings debated the merits of Malthus by the windows. A young gentleman she did not know was absorbed in what appeared to be mathematical calculations, and there was not a single person discussing the weather, fashion, or the latest whisper from the scandal sheets. Miss Langford, the Dowager Duchess, materialized at her elbow, a formidable woman of 70 with sharp eyes and sharper wit. "How delightful that you could join us. My nephew speaks most highly of your mind. Do come. You must meet Lady Whitmore. She has been corresponding with political economists in Edinburgh, and I know you will find her fascinating." Beatrice was introduced, welcomed, and drawn into conversation with a warmth she had never experienced in any London drawing room. These people wanted to hear her opinions. They asked her questions and actually listened to her answers. When she offered a critique of Professor Richmond's trade theory, citing his failure to account for transportation costs in his models, he did not dismiss her but engaged enthusiastically with her point. "Brilliant," he exclaimed. "I had not considered that variable. Miss Langford, have you published on this topic? I should very much like to read your analysis." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I have written some small pieces, Professor, though nothing of consequence." "She is too modest," Marcus said, appearing at her side with glasses of lemonade. "I have read several essays on economic theory published under the name Bartholomew Lawrence that demonstrate exceptional analytical precision. If Miss Langford were the author of such work, I would be most impressed indeed." His eyes met hers, and Beatrice understood with sudden clarity that he knew. The Duke of Silverton had discovered her secret. Terror and exhilaration warred in her chest. Would he expose her, mock her pretensions, use the knowledge against her somehow? But his expression held only encouragement, perhaps even approval. "If such essays exist," Beatrice said carefully, "their author would be grateful for your Grace's good opinion." "Then perhaps their author might consider revealing themselves," Marcus replied. "I suspect the world of economic thought would benefit from knowing that brilliance requires no particular gender." Around them, conversations paused. Lady Whitmore looked intrigued. Professor Richmond appeared thunderstruck. "Miss Langford," he said slowly, "are you Bartholomew Lawrence?" The moment stretched. Beatrice could deny it, retreat to safety, maintain her protective anonymity, or she could step into the light and accept whatever consequences followed. She met Marcus's gaze and saw something there that looked almost like faith. "I am," she said quietly. The room erupted in excitement. Professor Richmond demanded to know her thoughts on a dozen topics. Lady Whitmore wanted to arrange introductions with her Edinburgh correspondents. Two other guests revealed themselves as devoted readers of Mr. Lawrence's work. The Dowager Duchess looked enormously pleased, as if she had orchestrated the entire revelation. Perhaps she had. Beatrice spent the next 3 hours in the most stimulating conversation of her life. She debated theory, defended her positions, revised her thinking in response to new arguments. She laughed. She felt her mind stretch and grow in ways it never could in her aunt's quiet drawing room. And through it all, she was aware of Marcus watching her with an expression she could not quite interpret. As the evening drew to a close and guests began departing, he approached her once more. "I hope you will return next month, Miss Langford. We are planning a discussion of agricultural reform that I think would benefit from your perspective." "I should be delighted, Your Grace. This evening has been quite extraordinary." "The pleasure has been entirely ours. Might I also suggest that you consider attending Lady Castleton's assembly next Tuesday? She enjoys intelligent conversation and dislikes empty-headed chatter. I believe you would find her circle congenial." Beatrice hesitated. Lady Castleton was a patroness of Almack's, a woman whose approval could open doors throughout the ton. But she was also notoriously selective, and Beatrice had never moved in such elevated circles. "I am not certain I would be welcome in such company, Your Grace." "Then permit me to arrange an introduction. My aunt knows Lady Castleton quite well." "Why?" The question escaped before Beatrice could stop it. "Forgive me, Your Grace, but I do not understand your interest in my social advancement. We are barely acquainted." Marcus was silent for a moment, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to read. "Perhaps I am tired of watching brilliance go unrecognized," he said finally. "Or perhaps I simply enjoy good conversation and believe London would benefit from more of it. Does my motivation matter if the result is pleasant for all involved?" It was not quite an answer, but Beatrice found herself nodding nonetheless. Within 2 weeks, Beatrice Langford had received more invitations than in her previous 7 seasons combined. Lady Castleton's introduction led to vouchers for Almack's. The Dowager Duchess included her in a select afternoon party where she met Lady Jersey and made such a favorable impression that she was invited to a musical evening at Devonshire House. Society, it seemed, had discovered that Miss Langford was not merely a bluestocking, but a woman of remarkable intellect whose conversation enlivened any gathering. Hostesses who valued substance over superficiality began requesting her presence. Gentlemen who had never noticed her before sought introduction. And then Lord Edmund Whitworth, Earl of Fairmont, began to court her in earnest. He was 42, scholarly, kind, and genuinely interested in her mind. He quoted her essays in conversation. He asked her opinion on matters of estate management. When he danced with her at Almack's, he spoke of books and ideas rather than offering empty flattery. "I confess, Miss Langford," he said during a turn about the room, "I find your company remarkably refreshing. So many young ladies seem to have nothing of substance to discuss." "That is perhaps because they have been taught that substance is unappealing in women, my lord. Then they have been poorly taught. Intelligence is the most attractive quality a person can possess, regardless of gender." It was the kind of conversation Beatrice had dreamed of having with a potential suitor. Lord Whitworth was respectable, solvent, titled, and he actually respected her mind. She should have been elated. Instead, she found her eyes drifting across the ballroom to where Marcus stood speaking with some gentleman, his posture relaxed, his face arranged in an expression of polite interest that somehow never reached his eyes. 3 weeks into her social transformation, Beatrice stood in her aunt's drawing room receiving morning callers. Lord Whitworth had just departed, leaving behind a bouquet of roses and an invitation to drive in Hyde Park the following afternoon. "My dear girl," Aunt Helena said, beaming with pleasure, "an earl is courting you. An earl. After all these years, I had begun to fear you would never marry." "I am as surprised as you, Aunt." "Surprised? You should be jubilant. Lord Whitworth is quite respectable. His estate is unencumbered, and he seems genuinely fond of you. I do believe we shall be planning a wedding before summer's end." The door opened, and Lady Charlotte Montgomery swept in without waiting to be announced, a breach of etiquette that immediately put Beatrice on guard. Lady Charlotte was London's most accomplished gossip, a woman who collected scandal the way other ladies collected porcelain figurines. "My dear Miss Langford," she cooed, settling herself on the sofa with theatrical grace. "You are quite the sensation this season. Such a transformation. One might almost call it miraculous." "Lady Charlotte," Beatrice replied carefully, "how kind of you to call." "I confess, I was most curious to see you. Everyone is talking about your sudden rise in society, from wallflower to sought-after guest in a matter of weeks. It is quite the Cinderella story. I have been fortunate in making some new acquaintances." "Oh, is that what we are calling it?" Lady Charlotte's smile sharpened. "Forgive me, my dear, but surely you know about the wager?" The room seemed to tilt slightly. "I beg your pardon?" "The wager at White's. It is in the betting book, recorded in ink with 8 witnesses. Did no one tell you?" Lady Charlotte's tone dripped with false sympathy. "Lord Denbigh wagered the Duke of Silverton £10,000 that he could not marry you off to an earl or superior within 8 weeks. The entire club saw them shake hands on it. June 14th was the date recorded, which means His Grace has until the 10th of August to win his bet." The words struck like physical blows. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face as the pieces fell into horrible alignment. The chance encounter at Hatchard's, the salon invitation, the introductions to influential ladies, Marcus's careful orchestration of her social rise. It had all been strategy, a game, a wager to be won. "I see you were unaware," Lady Charlotte observed with satisfaction. "I thought you should know the truth before you embarrassed yourself further. His Grace is quite skilled at manipulation, they say. £10,000 is considerable motivation for even a duke." She departed shortly after, leaving devastation in her wake. Beatrice sat frozen on the sofa, her mind racing through every interaction with Marcus, reinterpreting each conversation, each gesture, each apparent kindness through this new, ugly lens. He had made her believe someone finally valued her mind. He had made her believe she might be worthy of genuine regard. And all of it, every moment, had been calculated manipulation in service of winning a bet. The humiliation was absolute, washing over her in a suffocating wave. But as she sat there, the shock began to recede, replaced by a clarity as cold and sharp as winter ice. "Beatrice," her aunt ventured carefully. "Surely there must be some misunderstanding." "No," Beatrice said, her voice eerily calm. "I do not believe there is." She rose from the sofa, her movements precise and controlled. The hurt would come later, she knew. But first, there was something else rising in her chest, something dangerous and essential. Fury. Marcus Beaumont had made her believe in the possibility of respect, of acceptance, of value beyond her ability to produce sons and manage a household. He had shown her a glimpse of what life might be if the world were different, if her mind mattered, if she mattered, and it had all been a lie in service of his pride and £10,000. Very well then. If the Duke of Silverton wished to play games, Beatrice would show him exactly how formidable an opponent he had chosen. She would not cry, she would not hide, she would wage war, and she would be utterly ruthless about it. The campaign began the following morning. Beatrice had spent 7 years observing society from its margins, watching the mechanisms of reputation and rumor, noting how information flowed through London's interconnected web of drawing rooms and ballrooms. She understood, perhaps better than most, exactly how to wield whisper and innuendo like a blade. Her first target was Lord Marcus himself. She called upon Lady Winslow, a widow of formidable fortune whose salon attracted the most influential gossips in London. Beatrice had been invited twice to the ladies' gatherings and knew she valued interesting information above almost all else. "My dear Miss Langford," Lady Winslow greeted her warmly. "How delightful. I have been hoping you would call. I confess, Lady Winslow, I find myself in need of advice from someone of experience and discretion." The older woman's eyes gleamed. Nothing pleased her more than being consulted as an oracle. Over tea, Beatrice wove her tale with surgical precision. She spoke of her concern for the Duke of Silverton, who had been so kind in facilitating her social introductions. She mentioned, with apparent reluctance, that she had heard disturbing rumors about his financial situation. Gambling debts, perhaps? She could not be certain, but someone had mentioned White's and substantial sums, and his Grace appearing rather anxious about matters of money. "Of course," Beatrice said with wide-eyed innocence, "I am certain there is no truth to such talk. But I did notice he has been quite insistent about arranging introductions between myself and Lord Whitworth, who is quite wealthy, and his Grace did mention needing to secure certain financial arrangements by mid-August. I am probably reading far too much into innocent coincidence." She left Lady Winslow's drawing room, knowing the seeds were planted. By evening, half of Mayfair would be whispering about the Duke of Silverton's supposed financial troubles. The following day, she called upon Mrs. Harriet Thornfield, whose husband sat on the boards of several major trading companies with significant London investments. "I am concerned about Silverton Estates," Beatrice confided. "A friend in the country mentioned seeing surveyors on ducal lands, and there was talk of portions being sold. Combined with what I have heard about His Grace's gaming at White's, I cannot help but worry. The Silverton name has always stood for financial stability. It would be tragic if mismanagement had endangered that legacy." Mrs. Thornfield, who prided herself on being first with any business intelligence, absorbed this information like blotting paper. By the end of the week, speculation about Marcus's finances had spread through London like plague. Whispers in hallways, knowing looks at assemblies. The Duke of Silverton, it was said, was in difficulties, gaming debts, mortgaged properties, desperate need to marry an heiress before creditors came calling. It was all completely false, of course. Marcus's fortune was substantial and unencumbered. But truth mattered less than narrative, and Beatrice had crafted a narrative designed to destroy the one thing Marcus valued most, his reputation for cool, unassailable competence. She also made herself utterly unavailable to him. When his card was left at her aunt's house, she was always out. When he appeared at assemblies where she was present, she was invariably engaged in conversation with someone else, always accompanied by chaperones, never accessible for private words. At Almack's on Wednesday evening, she watched him cross the room toward her with purposeful stride and immediately engaged Lady Castleton in animated discussion about agricultural theory, positioning herself in the center of a group that would make private conversation impossible. Marcus stopped 6 feet away, frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. Their eyes met across the space, and Beatrice allowed herself a small, cold smile before turning her attention back to Lady Castleton's question about crop rotation. She saw his jaw tighten. Good. Let him feel a fraction of the helplessness she had felt upon learning of his manipulation. Lord Whitworth, meanwhile, continued his attentions, apparently undeterred by the whispers about financial irregularities in Silverton's affairs. He was too decent, Beatrice thought with some guilt, to engage in that sort of speculation. Too honorable to believe malicious gossip without evidence. Unlike her. But then, she had evidence of Marcus's dishonor. She had his bet, recorded in ink, witnessed by 8 gentlemen. She had his systematic manipulation of her social standing in service of that wager. Whatever she did to him now was justice, not malice. At least that was what she told herself in the quiet hours of the night when guilt tried to surface. The 5th week arrived, bringing with it the season's most anticipated event, the Devonshire Ball, where 1,200 of London's elite would gather in spectacular excess. Beatrice attended in a gown of deep blue silk, the first truly fashionable dress she had owned in years. It had been a gift from Aunt Helena, who was beside herself with joy at her niece's sudden prospects. The color brought out the gray of Beatrice's eyes and made her skin seem luminous rather than merely pale. "You look beautiful," Lord Whitworth said when he claimed his promised dance. "Miss Langford, I wonder if we might speak privately this evening. There is a matter of some importance I wish to discuss with you." Beatrice's heart sank even as she smiled. She knew what he would ask, and she would have to refuse him, because accepting a proposal procured through another man's manipulation felt like capitulating to the very system that had dismissed her for 7 years. But before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew general attention. The Duke of Silverton had arrived, and he was not alone. He escorted Lady Helena Ashworth, a widow of enormous fortune and impeccable connections, but it was the man walking beside them who captured every eye in the ballroom. Lord Peter Denby, looking thoroughly uncomfortable. Marcus made his way directly to the Master of Ceremonies, spoke briefly, then approached the musicians. A moment later, the music ceased, and the dance floor cleared. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Master of Ceremonies announced, "His Grace the Duke of Silverton requests your attention for a matter of some importance." The ballroom fell silent. 1,200 people turned to watch as Marcus moved to the center of the floor, Lord Denby trailing behind him with visible reluctance. Even from this distance, Beatrice could see that Marcus had been shunned by 3 separate groups as he entered. The chill in the room was palpable. Beatrice felt ice form in her stomach. What was he doing? "Many of you," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space, "are aware of a wager recorded in White's betting book on the 14th of June. Lord Denby wagered me £10,000 that I could not facilitate the marriage of Miss Beatrice Langford to a gentleman of Earl's rank or higher within 8 weeks. Gasps rippled through the crowd. To speak of such things publicly was beyond scandalous. "I am here tonight," Marcus continued, and for a fleeting second his composure seemed to crack, revealing the immense personal cost of what he was about to do. "To inform you all that I have lost the wager." He pulled a bank draft from his pocket and handed it to Lord Denby with deliberate ceremony. £10,000, as agreed, paid in full with 2 weeks yet remaining of the original 8. I have failed completely in the task I accepted, and Lord Denby has won his bet. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Beatrice stood frozen, her mind settling into a cold, crystalline clarity. Marcus was not finished. "I wish to make clear," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "that my failure is not due to any deficiency in Miss Langford, who is the most intelligent, principled, and remarkable woman I have had the privilege to know. My failure is due to the fact that she discovered the existence of the wager 3 weeks ago and has spent the time since ensuring that my reputation, my social standing, and my peace of mind have all been systematically destroyed in recompense." He turned, his eyes finding Beatrice across the crowded floor. "She has proven herself a far more skilled strategist than I shall ever be, and I am paying this wager early to make absolutely clear that I acknowledge complete defeat. The bet is concluded. Miss Langford's marriage prospects, should she choose to marry at all, are her own business and no longer the subject of any gentleman's wager or manipulation." The crowd parted as he walked toward Beatrice, every eye in the ballroom watching. She stood her ground, chin raised, refusing to show the confusion roiling inside her. Marcus stopped at a respectful distance, close enough for conversation, but far enough to maintain propriety. "Miss Langford," he said quietly, though in the silence every word carried to the edges of the ballroom, "I owe you an apology that I suspect you will not accept, and an explanation that you have no obligation to hear. But if you would permit me 5 minutes of your time, I would attempt both." Beatrice looked at him, at this man who had shown her kindness that proved to be manipulation, who had made her believe and then broken that belief, who was now publicly humiliating himself in ways she did not entirely fathom. "You may have 3 minutes, Your Grace." A flash of something crossed his face. Approval, perhaps, or appreciation for her continuing hostility. "The wager was cruel and foolish, and I accepted it for reasons of pride that shame me now. I intended to arrange some introductions, perhaps facilitate a suitable match, and claim my £10,000. A game of strategy, nothing more." "And then?" Beatrice prompted when he paused. "And then I researched you and discovered that you were Bartholomew Lawrence. I read your work and was genuinely impressed. I invited you to my salon, not primarily to serve the wager, but because I wanted to meet the mind behind those essays. I wanted to see you in an environment where your brilliance would be recognized. How convenient that such recognition also served your purposes." "It did," Marcus agreed. "I will not pretend otherwise. But Miss Langford, somewhere in the second week, the purpose changed. The introductions I arranged stopped being about winning a bet and started being about correcting an injustice. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to have your mind celebrated. The fact that facilitating that also happened to serve my wager became coincidental rather than primary. You expect me to believe that?" "No," he said simply. "I have given you no reason to believe anything I say, which is why I paid the wager 2 weeks early, before you could possibly accept any proposal, before there was any outcome that could be interpreted as my success. I lost, Miss Langford, comprehensively. You outmaneuvered me at every turn. You paid £10,000 to make that point? I paid £10,000 to prove that your marriage prospects are no longer connected to my interests in any way. I paid it to free you from any shadow of my manipulation. And I paid it as acknowledgement that you were entirely justified in destroying my reputation these past 3 weeks. The rumors about my finances and my gaming debts were brilliantly constructed. I am fairly certain it will take me months to undo the damage." Despite herself, despite everything, Beatrice felt a small surge of satisfaction. They were well crafted, were they not? Devastatingly so. Lady Winslow has been positively frigid in her recent correspondence. 3 invitations have been quietly withdrawn. I believe Lord Hawthorne attempted to offer me a loan at a recent dinner, which was profoundly awkward. Good. Marcus's lips twitched. You are terrifying, Miss Langford. I am honestly relieved we are not actual enemies, because I suspect you would reduce me to social ruin within a fortnight. We are enemies, Your Grace. Are we? He studied her face with that analytical gaze she had once found flattering and now simply found frustrating. Or are we two proud people who both responded badly to being challenged, and who both have lessons to learn about the consequences of treating other human beings as pawns in games? I am not the one who made the wager. No, you merely systematically dismantled my reputation based on lies and manipulation. I am not saying you were wrong to do so, he added quickly as fire flashed in her eyes. I am saying we might both acknowledge that we are capable of ruthlessness when provoked, and that perhaps neither of us is entirely the villain in this scenario. Beatrice wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her righteous fury, but something in his words resonated uncomfortably with truth. Your 3 minutes are concluded, Your Grace. Then I will use my remaining moment to say this. I arranged for your work to be submitted to the Edinburgh Review under your real name. Professor Richmond wrote the letter of introduction, and Lady Whitmore provided supporting recommendations. Your essays on trade theory and banking reform will be published in the autumn edition, attributed to Miss Beatrice Langford. You will be the first woman to be published in that journal under her own name. He bowed, turned, and walked away, leaving Beatrice standing in the center of the ballroom with 1,200 people watching her reaction. She had none to give them. Her mind had gone utterly still, absorbing the enormity of what had just occurred. In the days that followed, Beatrice discovered that Marcus's public acknowledgement had changed everything and nothing. Society continued to buzz with scandal, but now the focus was divided between the shocking wager and the equally shocking revelation that Miss Langford had systematically destroyed a duke's reputation in retaliation. Opinion was split on who had behaved more abominably. Beatrice found she did not particularly care what society thought. She had spent 7 years caring very much what society thought, and it had earned her exactly nothing. Lord Whitworth called upon her the day after the Devonshire ball. Miss Langford, he said gently, I believe I know what you anticipated I would ask you, and I want to save you the discomfort of refusing me. Beatrice looked at him in surprise. My lord? You are a brilliant woman, my dear, but you have absolutely no skill at concealing your feelings. Every time I mentioned future plans, you had the look of someone facing execution. I am 8 and 40 years old. I can recognize when a lady is being courted from duty rather than desire. Lord Whitworth, I am so terribly sorry. Do not be. I have enjoyed your company immensely, and I hope we might remain friends. But I think perhaps your heart lies in a different direction, even if you are not ready to acknowledge it yet. He departed with gentleness and kindness, leaving Beatrice to contemplate his parting words. Her heart did not lie anywhere, she told herself firmly. Certainly not toward a man who had manipulated her for profit. But she could not stop thinking about Marcus's face when he paid that wager, the set of his shoulders when he walked away from the ballroom, the fact that he had arranged for her work to be published under her name, which would do him no good and might even associate him with controversy. She found herself reading his letters, which continued to arrive despite her failure to respond. They were not pleas for forgiveness or protestations of feeling. Instead, they were intellectual discussions, responses to her essays, questions about her theories, debates about points of economic policy. He wrote to her mind, not her vanity. And against her better judgment, she found herself writing back. The correspondence continued through July and into August, becoming a lifeline Beatrice had not realized she needed. She would sit by the window in her aunt's drawing room, holding the heavy cream paper he favored, tracing the sharp, decisive angles of his handwriting. There was a tactile intimacy to the exchange, the faint scent of ink and wax, the weight of his thoughts in her hands. In one letter, he challenged her views on the Corn Laws, arguing with a ferocity that made her pulse race. She would spend hours drafting her replies, searching for the precise words to dismantle his logic, feeling a thrill of connection that no ballroom conversation had ever provided. They never met in person. Beatrice made certain of that. But their letters grew longer, more frequent, more intimate in ways that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with genuine connection between similar minds. He sent her a copy of a new translation of Smith's work on moral sentiments, with notes in the margin disputing several of her previous arguments. She replied with a 12-page letter systematically destroying his counterpoints. They argued about Malthus and population theory. They discussed philosophy and literature and whether poetry had any practical value in modern society. It was the most stimulating intellectual partnership Beatrice had ever experienced, and it was happening entirely through correspondence because she was too stubborn and too frightened to meet him face to face. In late August, a package arrived containing an advance copy of the Edinburgh Review. Beatrice opened it with trembling hands to find her essay on banking reform printed under her own name, preceded by a brief note from the editor acknowledging that this represented a new era of inclusion for scholarly publication. She traced her finger over her own name in print, pressing the page briefly to her cheek. She saw her identity attached to ideas she had believed would only ever carry masculine pseudonyms, and for the first time since the night of the Devonshire ball, she permitted herself to cry. Marcus had done this. Whatever his initial motivations, whatever games he had played, he had given her this gift: legitimacy, recognition, a voice in the world of ideas. She sat down and wrote him a letter, the first that did not focus exclusively on intellectual debate. Your Grace, I received the Edinburgh Review today. I find myself uncertain how to properly express gratitude for a gift I did not request and do not entirely feel I deserve, given my conduct toward you these past months. You were right when you suggested we were both capable of ruthlessness when provoked. I have spent weeks destroying your reputation over a bet you ultimately refused to benefit from. I am not certain that makes me particularly principled or admirable. I am angry still. But I am beginning to suspect my anger is directed less at you than at the entire structure of a world where a woman's mind matters only when filtered through masculine authority, where marriage is a market and 7 seasons of failure render one invisible, where intelligence in women is treated as defect rather than virtue. You showed me a glimpse of what might be possible if the world were different. And then I learned it was manipulation. And the grief of that knowledge was disproportionate to any rational assessment of the situation. Which suggests, I suppose, that my reaction was not primarily rational. I do not know what I am trying to say with this letter. Perhaps only that I am tired of being angry, and that your correspondence has been the most valuable part of my recent months, and that I am sorry for the damage I caused to your standing, though not entirely sorry, because you did deserve some consequences for your choices. Yours in continued confusion, Beatrice Langford. His reply arrived the next morning. Miss Langford, do not apologize for defending yourself against manipulation. You had every right to respond as you did, and I would think less of you if you had simply accepted my behavior with passive resignation. You are correct that your anger is directed at systems larger than my individual choices, though I participated in those systems thoughtfully enough to bear responsibility. I made a wager on another person's life as if I had any right to do so. The fact that I ultimately intended kindness does not erase the fundamental arrogance of that initial act. I am grateful that you value our correspondence, as do I. Debating with you sharpens my thinking in ways that years of House of Lords speeches never managed. I wonder if you might be willing to meet me. Not for romance or reconciliation or anything that might make you uncomfortable, but simply to continue one of our debates in person. I suspect we would be twice as effective at destroying each other's arguments face to face. There is a small bookshop in Bloomsbury, Denton's, that holds weekly discussion groups on Thursdays at 4. Very informal, usually a dozen people arguing about whatever text they have chosen that week. Next Thursday, they will be discussing Mary Wollstonecraft, and I thought you might find it interesting. I will be there regardless of your decision. But I hope you might attend as well. Marcus Beatrice read the letter 3 times, analyzing every word for hidden manipulation or ulterior motive. But sometimes, she thought, a simple invitation was exactly what it appeared to be. Thursday afternoon found her walking into Denton's bookshop with her heart beating uncomfortably fast. The discussion group met in a back room lined with shelves, perhaps 15 people seated in a loose circle with books open in their laps. Marcus sat near the window, and when she entered, his face transformed with relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. He did not cross the room to greet her. He simply nodded, smiled, and indicated an empty chair across the circle from his own position. The discussion was passionate, contentious, and absolutely exhilarating. Wollstonecraft's arguments about women's education sparked fierce debate. Beatrice found herself defending positions she had never articulated publicly, challenging assumptions, building arguments in real time. And Marcus, seated across from her, engaged with every point she made, his responses sharp and respectful and clearly designed to push her thinking further. They were the last to leave, still arguing about Wollstonecraft's rhetoric as they stood on the pavement outside the shop in the late afternoon sun. "You cannot possibly believe her comparison of women to soldiers is effective," Marcus said. "The metaphor breaks down at multiple levels. The metaphor is brilliant precisely because it makes the reader uncomfortable. She is forcing her audience to confront contradictions in how they think about capacity and education. But soldiers are trained for violence, and she is arguing for education toward virtue, which makes the comparison lack philosophical consistency. Unless one interprets soldiers as trained for discipline and duty rather than violence specifically, in which case the metaphor holds." They walked slowly toward Bloomsbury Square, neither willing to end the conversation, both pretending they had not noticed how long they had been talking. "I have missed this," Marcus said finally. "Written correspondence is valuable, but it lacks the immediacy of direct debate." "I have missed it as well," Beatrice admitted, though I was determined not to acknowledge that fact. "Why?" "Because acknowledging it felt like capitulation, like forgiving you when I was not ready to do so." Marcus stopped walking. They stood near the square's iron fence, early evening light painting everything in shades of gold. "I do not deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly. "I am not asking for it. What I am asking for is the opportunity to continue knowing you in whatever capacity you find acceptable, as correspondent, as debate partner, as friend, if you can manage it. I have no expectations beyond that." "Why?" Beatrice heard herself echo his earlier question. "Why does it matter so much to you?" He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "Because in 5 years since my wife died, you are the first person who has made me feel truly alive. Not happy, necessarily. Certainly not comfortable. But alive in ways I thought I would never experience again." The honesty of it struck her breathless. "I fell in love with you," Marcus continued. "Somewhere between reading your essays and watching you destroy my reputation with surgical precision. I fell in love with your mind and your courage and your absolute refusal to accept mistreatment quietly. And I am not telling you this because I expect reciprocation. I am telling you because I think you deserve to know the truth of my motivations, even if that truth makes you uncomfortable." Beatrice stared at him, every argument and defense crumbling in the face of such naked vulnerability. "That is utterly unfair," she said finally. "I know. I wanted to continue being angry with you. It was safer than this. I know that too. And now you have just made it impossible for me to maintain my fury without feeling like a coward." Marcus smiled, though it did not quite reach his eyes. "I promise that was not my intention. Though if it has that effect, I cannot say I am sorry." "I am not in love with you," Beatrice said, because it seemed important to establish that boundary clearly. "I understand. But I do value your company, and your mind, and possibly your person, generally speaking. Though I am not ready to examine that particular feeling too closely, then we will not examine it. We will simply continue as we have been, and you will permit me the pleasure of your intellectual company, and I will try not to make you uncomfortable with declarations of feeling." "That last one seems like a fruitless endeavor, Your Grace." "Marcus," he corrected gently, If we are to be friends, I would prefer you call me Marcus. Beatrice, she replied, for the same reason. They stood in the fading light, and something settled between them that felt almost like peace. The autumn of 1817 brought changes that rippled through London society in ways both subtle and profound. Beatrice's essay in the Edinburgh Review sparked controversy and conversation in equal measure. Several newspapers published responses, some supportive, others scandalized that a woman would dare publish on economic theory. The Edinburgh Review's editor stood firm, announcing that future submissions from women would be evaluated on merit, not gender. 3 other women submitted essays under their own names in the months that followed. Beatrice and Marcus continued their Thursday meetings at Denton's bookshop, a routine that gradually expanded to include occasional walks in Hyde Park, visits to museum exhibitions, and dinners at Silverton House, where the Dowager Duchess presided with obvious satisfaction over their growing friendship. They did not court. They did not follow any of the prescribed patterns of romantic attachment. They simply spent time together, arguing about philosophy and politics and literature, gradually building something that had no name but felt increasingly essential to both of them. Lord Peter Denby, humiliated by the entire affair and pressured by Marcus's not-so-subtle suggestions, established a charitable fund with the £10,000 specifically to provide grants for the private education of young ladies of exceptional promise. It was the least he could do, Marcus had indicated, to begin repairing the damage his cruel wager had caused. Society watched Beatrice and Marcus with avid interest, waiting for engagement announcement that never came. They are friends, the Dowager Duchess explained to anyone who asked. Genuine friends, which is far more valuable than premature romance. Let them discover themselves in their own time. Christmas approached, bringing with it the traditional seasonal entertainments. Beatrice received an invitation to spend the holiday at Silverton Hall, Marcus's country estate in Derbyshire, as part of a house party that would include the Dowager Duchess, several scholarly friends, and a dozen other guests. She accepted and found herself traveling north through December snow to an estate that seemed drawn from fairy tales. The journey was long and biting, the air inside the carriage crisp enough to see one's breath despite the fur rugs and hot bricks at her feet. As they left the grey sprawl of London for the rolling white hills of Derbyshire, Beatrice felt the constraints of the city falling away, replaced by the wild, silent beauty of the winter landscape. When they finally arrived, the house rose from the frost-covered gardens in a blaze of golden stone and mullioned windows, light spilling from every pane to welcome them. Marcus greeted her arrival personally, handing her down from the carriage with careful courtesy. "Welcome to Silverton Hall," he said. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was peaceful, actually. I read most of your latest letter about Bentham's utilitarianism and prepared 17 counter-arguments." "Only 17? You must be getting soft." The week that followed was one of the happiest of Beatrice's life. Days filled with long walks through winter gardens, evenings of music and conversation, mornings spent in the magnificent library where she and Marcus debated philosophy while snow fell outside the windows. On Christmas Eve, after the other guests had retired, they sat together in the library with the fire burning low and brandy warming their hands. The room was a sanctuary of knowledge, smelling of old leather bindings, beeswax polish, and wood smoke. Heavy velvet curtains shut out the snowy night, creating a warm, enclosed world where only the two of them existed, surrounded by the wisdom of centuries. "I have something for you," Marcus said, retrieving a wrapped package from the desk. Inside, Beatrice found a first edition of Adam Smith's complete works, beautifully bound in leather with her initials stamped in gold. "I thought," Marcus said quietly, "that you should have them in your own name. No more hiding behind masculine pseudonyms. No more apologizing for brilliance." Beatrice ran her fingers over the leather binding, emotion thick in her throat. "I have something for you as well," she said, pulling a package from her reticule. It was a book, but when Marcus opened it, he found not a printed volume but pages of handwritten notes. His letters to her, all of them, carefully organized and annotated. "I wanted you to know," Beatrice said, "that I kept them, all of them. Even when I was angry, even when I wanted to burn them, I could not bring myself to destroy your words, because they mattered to me, because you matter to me." Marcus looked at her, firelight painting gold across his features. "Beatrice," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to feel absolutely no pressure to answer in any particular way. Ask, would you consider a courtship? A genuine courtship, not manipulation or strategy or anything beyond two people who value each other exploring whether that value might become something more?" Beatrice took a breath, considering the question and all its implications. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them." "I want a contract drawn up before any engagement that guarantees me complete financial autonomy. £5,000 per year, secured in a private trust in my own name, property controlled solely by me, the right to continue publishing under my own name without requiring your permission." "Agreed. What else?" "I want your promise that you will never, ever make decisions about my life without consulting me first. No orchestrating my social advancement, no arranging opportunities without my knowledge, no benevolent manipulation of any kind. You have my word. Anything else?" "A long courtship, at least a year. I need time to be certain this is real and not simply the lingering effects of intellectual compatibility and proximity." Marcus smiled. "1 year minimum. I accept those terms gladly. May I add one condition of my own?" "What is it?" "That you permit me to tell you, occasionally, that I love you. Not to pressure you toward reciprocation, but simply because it is true, and I would like to say it." Beatrice felt warmth spread through her chest, unfurling like spring flowers. "I suppose I can tolerate that," she said, fighting a smile. "Occasionally." "Then we have an agreement?" "We have an agreement." Marcus crossed the space between them and took her hand, raising it to his lips with old-fashioned gallantry. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me a chance I probably do not deserve." "You are right," Beatrice replied. "You do not deserve it. But I am discovering that I am not particularly interested in what you deserve. I am interested in what we might build together, if we are both brave enough to try." 1 year later, June 1818, they stood together in St. George's Church on Hanover Square and spoke vows that Beatrice had helped write. She wore cream silk and carried roses from the Silverton Gardens. She walked down the aisle alone, without a male relative to give her away, because she was giving herself freely and required no man's permission to do so. The marriage contract was revolutionary, guaranteeing her unprecedented autonomy through a strict settlement that protected her funds from her husband's control. Marcus's wedding gift to her was publication of her collected economic essays in book form, with a preface written by Professor Richmond endorsing the expansion of scholarly opportunities for women. The book would become required reading in several universities, though not without controversy. Beatrice's gift to Marcus was a complete translation of Adam Smith's The Theory of Moral Sentiments with extensive commentary, dedicated to the man who taught me that intellect requires no particular gender and that transformation is possible even for the most guarded hearts. At the reception, Lady Charlotte attempted to approach them to offer congratulations, but Beatrice looked directly through her with an expression of such arctic coldness that the woman actually stepped backward. Marcus watched this happen and fought to contain his laughter. "You are terrifying," he murmured. "I am so grateful we are on the same side now." "Are we?" Beatrice replied with a small smile. "I seem to recall we still have unresolved arguments about Malthusian theory. Ongoing debate is not the same as enmity." "No, I suppose it is not." Lord Peter Denby, looking thoroughly chastened and significantly more humble than a year previous, approached to offer his congratulations and inform them that his educational fund had just funded its 12th grant. "I wanted you both to know," he said quietly. that I am profoundly sorry for my role in causing you pain. I was young and foolish and cruel, and I have spent the past year trying to make amends. In fact, one of the young women we supported has just been accepted as a governess to a royal household in Prussia, solely on the strength of her mathematics, which she was able to study due to the fund. Then continue doing so, Beatrice said, not unkindly. For the rest of your life, if necessary. There are many women who deserve opportunities they have been denied. After he departed, Marcus turned to her with raised eyebrows. You were almost gentle with him. He is learning. Growth should be encouraged, even in former idiots. As evening fell, they stood together on the terrace of Silverton House, watching the last guests depart in their carriages. London spread below them, golden in the sunset, the scent of coal smoke and rain hanging in the air, the distant sound of church bells marking the hour. It was a city of noise and commerce and scandal, but from here it looked full of possibility. What are you thinking? Marcus asked. That a year ago I wanted to destroy you. 6 months ago I was terrified of my feelings for you. And now I am married to you, which seems impossibly unlikely. Regrets? Not one. You? Only that I wasted time on pride and games instead of simply asking to know you from the beginning. Beatrice leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Then we shall have to make up for lost time. A lifetime might not be sufficient. Then let us see what we can accomplish in the time we have. 3 months later, in the library at Silverton Hall, Beatrice sat by the fire with the first proofs of her new book spread across her lap. The philosophical treatise on women's education had been 3 years in the writing, and she read the pages with satisfaction, tempered by the exhaustion of early pregnancy. Marcus entered the room, carrying tea and looking at her with the mixture of concern and admiration that had become familiar. You should rest, he said. Dr. Henderson said not to overtax yourself. Dr. Henderson says many things, few of which acknowledge that my mind does not cease functioning simply because I am carrying a child. Fair point. He settled into the chair across from her. How are the proofs? Excellent. Infuriating. I have identified at least 40 places that require revision. Of course you have. They sat in comfortable silence, fire crackling, autumn rain pattering against the windows. This peace, hard-won and precious, felt like the greatest victory of all. Marcus, Beatrice said eventually, do you ever think about that wager at White's? About how we began? Sometimes. Why? Because I find myself almost grateful for it, which seems perverse. If Peter Denby had not been cruel, if you had not been arrogant, we might never have truly known each other. You believe our story required such an ugly beginning? No. But I believe the struggle made us better. You learned humility. I learned to fight for myself rather than accepting dismissal. We both learned that transformation requires discomfort. Marcus considered this. I suppose there is truth in that, though I still wish my path to loving you had involved less manipulation and more basic decency. Your path to loving me involved exactly what it needed to involve. I am not certain I would have respected you if you had been immediately perfect. Good thing I was spectacularly imperfect then. Spectacularly, Beatrice agreed, smiling. Outside, rain continued falling on the Derbyshire countryside, nourishing the earth, preparing the ground for spring. Inside, 2 people who had been wagered on and wounded, manipulated and transformed, sat together in the warm light, building a future neither had thought possible. 7 seasons unwed had become a beginning, not an ending. A wager had become a war, which had become a courtship, which had become a marriage that challenged every convention of its time. And Beatrice Langford, who had spent years invisible in ballrooms and drawing rooms, whose brilliance had been dismissed and whose value had been questioned, sat in her own library in her own home, legally autonomous and publicly acknowledged, with the man she loved reading beside her and their child growing within her. She had been told she was impossible to marry, too old, too plain, too intelligent, too opinionated. She had proven them all wrong, not by changing herself, but by refusing to accept their limitations. And that, she thought, was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of Beatrice and Marcus's story. If this tale of wit, vengeance, and hard-won love moved your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in second chances and the power of intellectual equals finding each other. Your support helps us continue creating stories of courage, transformation, and love that defies expectations.